Hey, in this video I'm going to explain how you can use Microthemer to add CSS to specific pages rather than all of your styles being loaded in a single global style sheet that loads on all pages. So the main benefits of this are page speed optimization. By ensuring that only the styles that are needed load on each page, then the overall weight of the page will be no more than it has to be. We're also going to look at how you can defer the loading of certain CSS styles so that they only load after all of the critical content on the page has already loaded. This is what Google recommends by inlining critical CSS and deferring the less important CSS. It's the gold standard for loading CSS on websites, and we'll look a bit later on how you can enable this in Microthemer with a few clicks. The other benefit of this is that we can ensure that our styles only apply where intended. So right now the solution for doing that in Microthemer is, let's say we target an element. If we enable this page ID option here, then that ensures that our selectors will only target the current page that we're looking at. And this option will remain, and you may still prefer to use that, but we're going to look at an alternative option where we can apply our styling at the folder level by assigning certain folders to certain pages of our site. And finally, with this option to choose where we load our CSS, we can also load CSS in the admin area if we choose. Now that's something I'll look at the end of this video. Support for this isn't enabled by default, but you can enable it via the preferences. So let's start with a simple example. We have a selector that targets this first paragraph here and makes the text a bit bigger and gives it a border. So this is globally applying to the whole site, so it's affecting the About page, the Contact page, and this Load CSS page. So Microthemer organizes your selectors into folders. It creates a default one called General, and it just adds all of your selectors to this, unless you manually move them around into more organized folders. And this view I'm looking at just shows the folders and the styles at the same time. You can customize the view via here. By this view menu, I've set it to extra large and just slightly refined the layout options a little bit. And by default, all of the folders are going to be added to the global style sheet. But we have a new option now where we can set the folder to load on specific pages. So the most common use for this will just be limiting the folder's styles to a single page. So to do this, we can add a condition, and I'm going to choose to add it to this page here, and I'm going to click add. And then Microthemer generates what is essentially PHP code. Microthemer doesn't use the eval statement to process PHP, so you can't just enter arbitrary PHP in here, but you can use this option to generate code from the menu, or you can use the reference and then enter your own conditions here. You can enter multiple conditions and you can build your own, and these are all allowed. These are the whitelisted set of WordPress functions and some custom ones in Microthemer that allow you to specifically load your CSS on the admin area as well. So going back to what Microthemer just created, it's created a function that says isPage load CSS conditionally. And this is the URL, like the slug of the particular page, load CSS conditionally. Now, if this statement is deemed to be true, then our folder will load its content and if it's deemed to be false, then it won't load. And we can just check this by using the save and test option here. And we can see that the style is still applying to the page, and as confirmation we get this option here that says that it is loading. We can actually even look at the statement and see if Microthemer understood what we had written. That's useful if you're writing your own and something's not working quite as you expect, and you can have a look at what Microthemer is, how it's understanding the content that you've added. So if we just to test things, if we just change this to a random series of letters, so that's not referencing the slug for this page, and we click save and test, then our styles disappear and we get a confirmation that this isPage function returned false, and so our styles are not loading. So let's just take another example. If we wanted to have our styles loading on this page and on, say, the About page, what I could do is I could just search for the About page here, and then we use the OR option. When you're listing a series of pages, you use OR. In a moment, we'll look at the exclude option where it's slightly different. So if I save that, then what we'll find is if we go to the About page, we've still got our styles, but if we go to the Contact page, it's disappeared. So we've just got those two. Now, an alternative way of doing this is to use an exclusion rather than an inclusion. So I'm just going to get rid of this. And if I say exclude from the Contact page, and I'll go and find the Contact page there and add that, and then save and test, It still won't display on the contact page, but if we go to the About page, it is displaying. Or we go to the Load Conditional page, it's also displaying. Now, it's not displaying on the contact page. However, it might be displaying on the blog page or the search results page and more places than we might want. So we can also update that to add an extra limitation. So we've got that we don't want it to display on the contact page, but we could say and is page. So you can write your own here. You can look at this option here to see which functions are supported, and then you can write your own condition and then click Save and Test. And that way we can see that it's still not going to load on here, but it will load on these other pages because they have the type page. They're not single posts or something like that. So hopefully you can see that you've actually got a lot of freedom here in defining exactly where your CSS should display. And by the way, if you click on these links, if I click on Is Page, then it takes you to the WordPress documentation, which just tells you how to use the function, what you can pass in and what you can't. The functions down here, these are custom Microthemer ones. That's just where I've reviewed the WordPress API and had a little look at what might be useful, such as user has role. That's something that there's no function for, but you could enter the text inside some quotes, subscriber or contributor or administrator, and then add some CSS that only targets particular types of users. And as you've seen, you can combine them in any way as well. Down the bottom, we've just got some native PHP language constructs. So we've got isSet function, and you might want to use that in combination with get sometimes to check if, say, a particular parameter in the URL has been set and only load some CSS then. Okay, so let's take a look now at the deferred CSS. So here we've got some below the fold content. Let's imagine that there's a bit more text above here, and this is much further down. So on any screen size, this content here would not be visible. What we can do here is, and all of the folder that's responsible for all these styles is called categories. If I go and edit that now, what I can do is I can add a condition where I can say I want it to load only on this page. So I'm going to say this page here, add, and I want, instead of it displaying as an inline tag, which is the default, that's usually the best if for critical CSS that needs to display as soon as the page loads. It's slightly better than using an external file because an inline tag doesn't block the loading of other resources. But when you're deferring the loading of the CSS, that's when using an external file with the async option enabled comes in very handy. So if we just save that, what will happen is Microthemer will include the style sheet on the page, but the rel tag will be preload rather than style sheet. So the styles won't actually load in the usual sequence, but instead it will wait until all of the content that needs to load has been loaded. And then there's a little script which just switches the rel attribute from preload to style sheet, and then the styles will display. Okay, so now let's look at loading styles on the admin side. That's useful if you want to make sure that styles that appear on the front end also appear in the Gutenberg editor. Now, this isn't actually as straightforward as it might seem because the HTML on the front end compared to the HTML in the Gutenberg editor is quite different. And so it's not just a case of loading the styles, you also need to be a bit careful about how you target the elements. So for instance, here I've got an element. I'll just open the inspection pane here. And this first list item has a class called myCustomClass. And if I give that a background color, let's say, just to make it obvious, then I need to make sure that I'm using a very broad class, so just the class by itself. By default, Microthemer suggests selectors based with high specificity unless you switch this toggle to low. So if it's low, it'll likely only use a single class. If it's high, it might use the parent, like attributes of parent elements to define the context. So that's just one thing you need to bear in mind. Set this to low. The other thing you need to do is you need to actually enable support for it. Because this is a slightly niche feature that beginners might struggle with, it's not enabled by default. So you need to go into the preferences and set support admin area style loading first. So I'll just save that. And then if we go to the actual admin page, I'll just click edit. By the way, if you hold control while you click a link in Microthemer, it will go to it will follow the link rather than selecting it for editing. Now, even though we've enabled support for loading admin styles, it's not loading because we added this this selector to a folder that is currently set to load it only on pages. Okay, so what we can do is create a folder. I'm going to call it Load CSS Front and Back, and then I just add that. And then if I move my selector into this folder, and then I set the logic to, and this is where one of these useful custom function comes in. So Microthemer has this option here where if you want it to be on both the front and the back, you can use this function. If you enter nothing in these brackets here, no parameter, then it will just display on every page on the front and every page on the back. But if I use the page ID, like 2, and then click Save, then we can see that our style is displaying here in the admin area in Gutenberg. And if we go to the front, we can see that it's still displaying on the front end too. Now, there's another option in the preferences for applying styling to the admin area, and that's this one here. So this one says support admin area point and click editing, and that basically means you can customize it in the same way you customize the front end by selecting elements with Microthemer. This is really only useful if you want to white label the WordPress dashboard or just add some of your branding colors to it. So to show you how this works, I'll just enable that. And then we'll go back to the admin side. And then you can see that I can hover over things and target them. So for instance, if I just go to the page here, and what I'm going to do is I could select this, but I can't apply styles at the moment. In fact, if I try, I'll just do it to show you how this works. So I'm going to say what I want to change is, say, the border width. If I try and do that, then we've got up here, Microthemer just gives us a warning saying that the folder isn't loading on this page. Because remember, the logic we added to this folder was just for that single page on the front and the back, but only that single page. So what we might want to do is say, I'm going to use this test folder. So I'm going to pop this in here, and I'm going to set this test folder to be is admin. Save that. And then what I can do is I can make sure that the style overrides by using important here, and then I could just tweak it however I like. There is a setting that's enabled by default for beginners where important is just added to all styles to save you having to do this and think about CSS specificity. It might be useful if you're customizing the admin area, even if you do know about CSS specificity. And if you do want to change that, just use this option here. As I said, it's on by default for beginners, but developers will most likely want to turn it off for most of the time. So you can now use Microthemer as a tool for theming WordPress admin area if that's what you want. So there are some visual cues that tell you whether your folder is loading or not. So these are all a bit grayed out, and this test folder is the only one that's showing because this is the one that's actually affecting the current page. So just to change that, if I change this to not admin, if you put an exclamation mark, then it means not is admin, and I save that. Then you'll notice that the folder will go grey. And what also happens is that the shading of the selected element that has a tick, which shows that we've already created a selector for it. And it's normally blue, but it's grey just to give us a visual cue that our folder isn't currently loading on the current page anymore. So just to recap, when it comes to applying styles to the admin area, you do need to enable these preferences here, or one of them, if not both of them, and you then need to assign logic to a folder to tell it to display on the admin area. So global folders that don't have any logic, they'll still just display on the front end like they always have done. So I'm recording this video just before releasing this feature as a beta. Still to come, I'm going to be merging the full code view, which you normally get to over here. And that allows you to add, instead of just single selectors that are in the folders, you can just add any arbitrary CSS, or if you've enabled support for Sass, then Sass code too. But I'm going to be merging this with the folder system so that you can add, instead of just adding a single selector to folders, you can also add a Sass snippet or JavaScript snippets. And you'll also be able to add subfolders as well. I'm also planning on adding some extra functions here so that you can easily integrate with other WordPress tools like, say, advanced custom fields or meta or any other kind of third-party content where you want to match the styles with a particular condition. So please let me know if you have any requests for additional functionality here. And finally, with this new system of conditional folders, I was thinking about possibly modifying the way selectors are automatically added to folders. So right now, If you don't manage the folders yourself in any way, Microthemer just creates a folder called General when you first install it, and it will keep adding folders. Once that reaches a limit of, say, 40 selectors, it just creates another folder called General 2 and General 3 and so on. And they're all global because they have no logic. But what that could be replaced by is a system where whenever you're on a new page, a new folder is created for that page, and then it automatically organizes your selectors into those folders. So yeah, let me know if you think that would be useful to you. I think that's everything now that I've covered that I wanted to talk about in this video, so thank you very much for watching.